The emergency room smelled like antiseptic and dread. Emma had learned to identify both. The sharp chemical bite of bleach and alcohol embedded in the walls. The softer, heavier scent of people sitting in plastic chairs, waiting for news that might destroy them. She had spent enough time in hospitals to know the geography of desperation. The way people hunched over their phones without actually looking at the screens. The way exhausted mothers stroked their children's hair in the blue-white glow of the overhead lights. The way time moved differently inside these walls, thick and sluggish, like trying to run through wet concrete. Tonight, she was the one sinking. Her hands would not stop shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs, willing them still, but the trembling moved upward through her arms and settled somewhere behind her sternum, heavy and cold. Like a stone she could not dislodge no matter how many slow breaths she forced herself to take. The fluorescent lights above her hummed at a frequency that felt deliberate, engineered specifically to sharpen the headache already drilling behind her left eye. Outside, Chicago was buried under 8 inches of February snow. She had walked 6 blocks through it alone, her coat inadequate, her boots soaked through to the sock, because the Uber app had shown a 40-minute wait, and her wrist had been swelling since she slipped on the ice outside the diner, where she worked the closing shift 3 nights a week, on top of her full-time job at the laundromat on Ashland Avenue. 2 jobs. 1 small apartment in Pilsen that cost more than it should. 0 margin for anything to go wrong. Everything had gone wrong anyway. But the wrist was not what was making her hands shake. Across the waiting room, she could see them. Derek and his mother, Linda. Derek, who had spent 3 years telling Emma she was difficult to love. Derek, whose name was still technically listed on her emergency contact form because she had not had the emotional bandwidth to update it in the 10 months since she had finally packed 1 duffel bag and walked out of the apartment they had shared on West Fullerton. Derek, who was currently speaking to the intake nurse with the kind of calm, reasonable smile that had fooled every single person who had ever met him, his hand resting on his mother's elbow, the picture of a devoted son. Emma's throat closed. She did not know why he was here. She did not know if it was coincidence or something else. Something that made the skin on the back of her neck prickle with old trained instinct. What she knew was that Linda had already spotted her. Linda, who had called Emma ungrateful at the Thanksgiving table and smiled while she did it. Linda, who was now leaning toward her son and saying something behind her hand, her eyes fixed on Emma across the rows of plastic chairs. Derek turned. Their eyes met. His smile didn't change. That was the thing about Derek that had taken Emma 2 years to understand. His smile never changed based on what he was actually feeling. It was a costume he wore, perfectly fitted, never slipping. He raised one hand in a small wave, almost friendly, and took a step in her direction. Emma stood up. She didn't have a plan. That had always been her problem, she thought in the fractured, adrenaline-bright way her mind worked when panic took over. She reacted instead of planned. She felt instead of calculated. She grabbed her coat from the chair beside her and took 3 steps sideways down the row, putting distance between herself and the direction Derek was walking, and her shoulder collided solidly with someone who had been standing completely still behind her. She stumbled. A hand caught her elbow. Not grabbing, not gripping, just steady, like a wall that had decided to be helpful. "I'm sorry," she gasped, turning. "I didn't see you standing there. I'm so sorry. I just need to." The apology dissolved. The man looking down at her was tall, dark-haired, wearing a coat that cost more than Emma's monthly rent, and utterly, completely still in the way that certain people were still. Not nervous stillness, not the frozen stillness of surprise. The kind of absolute quiet composure that came from a person who had never once in their life needed to fill silence with movement or sound. His eyes were gray, the particular shade of gray that existed at the exact moment before a storm broke over Lake Michigan, and they were watching her with an expression she could not immediately name. Not irritation. Not curiosity exactly. Something older than both. Behind her, she heard Derek's voice. Emma. Hey. Small world. Right? Her whole body went rigid. The man with the storm-gray eyes looked past her shoulder for exactly 1 second. Then, he looked back at her. Something shifted in his expression, slight as a change in barometric pressure, there and gone so fast she would have missed it if she hadn't been staring directly at him. She did not know what made her say it. Desperation, probably. The particular brand of reckless that only activates when the alternative is worse than the risk. Please, she said, low and fast, just loud enough for him to hear. Please just tell him you're my husband. Just say it once. I know it's crazy, I know you don't know me. But he won't leave me alone and I just can't tonight, please. The man looked at her for one long, measuring moment. Then, Derek appeared at her side. There you are, Derek said, his voice warm and familiar and horrible. Didn't know you were sick. You should have called me, I would have driven you. The man beside Emma moved. Not much. Just a single, small shift of his weight that somehow resulted in him being positioned precisely between Emma and Derek, close enough that his arm almost touched hers. She doesn't need to call you, the man said. His voice was quiet, the kind of quiet that didn't need volume to fill a room. She has me. Derek's smile didn't falter. That was the thing Emma had never been able to explain to anyone who hadn't seen it themselves. The way his pleasantness was structural, load-bearing, built into the architecture of his face so that nothing from the inside could disturb it. He looked at the man standing beside Emma the way he looked at everything that didn't immediately make sense to him, with polite, patient assessment, the way a person might study a weather forecast they found unlikely. That's funny, Derek said. Emma didn't mention she was seeing anyone. The man beside her didn't respond to that. He looked at Derek the way Emma imagined geologists looked at landscapes, taking in information without urgency, cataloging without reaction. Didn't she? He said finally. It wasn't a question. Derek's smile adjusted by approximately 2 degrees. We were together for 3 years. I think I'd know if she had someone. Emma felt the man beside her exhale once, slow and controlled. Then his hand moved to the small of her back. Not possessive, not performative, just present, the way a person touches someone they've touched 1,000 times before, casual and certain and completely unremarkable. We've been married 8 months, the man said. You're welcome to do the math on the overlap. The waiting room had the particular quality of public spaces where people were pretending not to listen. Emma was aware of the woman 2 seats down who had stopped scrolling her phone. The teenage boy across the room who had looked up from his sneakers. The intake nurse who had found a reason to stay near the desk rather than disappearing through the double doors. Derek looked at Emma. She made herself look back. 8 months, he repeated. The man beside her said nothing. Emma had the strange, disorienting sense that he was entirely comfortable with silence in a way most people simply were not, that he could stand in it indefinitely, like silence was a native environment he had no need to escape. Emma, Derek said, and his voice had shifted, still pleasant, but with something underneath it now, the faint harmonic of a warning dressed as concern. You could have just told me. She found her voice somewhere beneath the hammering of her heart. I'm telling you now, she said. Derek looked between them one more time. Then he nodded once, the gracious, magnanimous nod of a man who was deciding to be the bigger person, and Emma knew that nod, had spent 3 years learning its precise taxonomy, knew it meant nothing good, and that whatever happened next would be framed later as her fault. I'll let you get checked in, he said. We should catch up sometime. For closure. He walked back toward his mother. Linda was watching Emma with an expression that could not quite decide between contempt and curiosity. Then the double doors opened, a nurse called Linda's name, and they were gone. Emma stood completely still for approximately 4 seconds. Then the shaking came back, worse than before, starting in her hands and moving upward until her shoulders were trembling and her breath was coming in the shallow, insufficient way that happened when her body decided the emergency was over and released everything it had been holding. The man's hand was still at the small of her back. "You should sit down," he said. She sat, partly because her knees suggested it strongly, and partly because arguing required resources she did not currently have. He sat beside her, not close enough to crowd, far enough to make it clear the proximity was her choice to maintain or close. Emma stared at the floor. The linoleum was beige with a pattern of small gray shapes that might have been intended to be abstract or might have just been the result of years of foot traffic and industrial cleaning. She focused on it until her breathing slowed to something approximating normal. "Thank you," she said finally to the floor. "You didn't have to do that." "No," he agreed. She looked up at him sideways. He was looking straight ahead at the opposite wall with the same expression he'd worn throughout the entire exchange, calm and unreadable and fundamentally unbothered. "I'll fix my emergency contacts tomorrow," she said. "He won't have a reason to show up again." The man said nothing. Emma pressed her uninjured hand against her knee to stop the last of the trembling. She became aware, in the way that awareness sometimes arrived late after adrenaline receded, that she had absolutely no idea who this person was. She had grabbed a stranger. She had asked him to claim her. He had done it without hesitation, without asking for an explanation, without negotiating terms or expressing skepticism or doing any of the things a reasonable person would do when a woman they had never met whispered a desperate request in an emergency room waiting area. She should probably know his name, at minimum. "I'm Emma," she said. "Reyes." He turned his head and looked at her directly for the first time since they'd sat down. Up close, in the particular unflattering honesty of fluorescent light, his face was striking in a way that had nothing to do with conventional attractiveness and everything to do with precision. Sharp jaw. Dark brows. The gray eyes that had registered on her earlier as storm-colored were, she now saw, not quite one consistent shade but layered, like lake water over varying depths. He said, "Elias." Just Elias, she thought. No last name offered. "Do you actually need to be seen?" he asked, nodding toward her wrist. "Or did you come here for another reason?" "No," she said. "I slipped on the ice. I think it might be sprained." He looked at her wrist. She had it cradled against her stomach, and now that she was sitting and the Derek situation had receded, the pain was reasserting itself with significant interest, throbbing in a rhythm that matched her heartbeat exactly. "You walked here," he said. It wasn't a question either. His eyes had dropped briefly to her boots, which were soaked dark with melted snow up past the ankle. 6 blocks, she confirmed. He looked at her for a moment, with an expression she still could not name. Then he stood, walked to the intake desk, and spoke to the nurse in a voice too low for Emma to hear from where she was sitting. The nurse, who had been in the process of turning away, stopped. Looked at him, nodded twice, and reached for something behind the desk. Emma watched this happen with the detached bewilderment of someone whose evening had already exceeded her capacity for surprise. He came back and sat down. "They'll call you in 10 minutes, he said. Emma stared at him. The waiting room had been backed up for 2 hours. She had checked when she arrived, calculated the weight against the pain level, decided the pain level 1. "How did you do that?" she said. He looked at the opposite wall again. "I know the administrator," he said simply. Emma considered this. Outside the tall windows at the end of the waiting room, Chicago was still buried in snow, the kind of heavy, insistent February snowfall that muffled the city's noise and made the streets look briefly, falsely peaceful. The lights of the parking structure across the street blurred through the frosted glass into soft orange smears. She had walked through that to get here, alone the way she did everything. "Can I ask you something?" she said. He waited. "Why did you do it?" "The husband thing. You didn't know me. You didn't know the situation. You could have just stepped aside." Elias was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that felt considered rather than evasive. "You said please," he said finally. Emma looked at him. His expression didn't change. "You said please," he repeated, as if that were the entirety of the explanation. As if please from a stranger in a fluorescent-lit emergency room at 10:30 on a Wednesday night in February was a complete and sufficient reason to claim a woman as his wife in front of her ex-partner, without a moment's hesitation. Emma opened her mouth, closed it. A nurse appeared in the doorway and called her name. She stood, gathered her coat, turned to look at him one more time, because she had the sudden, irrational sense that if she walked through those doors he would simply cease to exist, dissolve back into whatever impossible evening had briefly produced him. "Thank you," she said again. "Elias." He looked at her with those layered gray eyes. "I'll be here when you come out," he said. She believed him. She did not know why. She walked through the double doors into the bright, humming interior of the treatment area, and behind her, in the waiting room, every person who had been pretending not to watch quietly exhaled. None of them had recognized him. But 3 of the staff had, and they would spend the rest of their shifts debating in hushed voices what Elias Vane, the reclusive majority owner of Vane Medical Group, the man whose family had quietly funded this hospital's entire East Wing renovation, was doing sitting alone in the public waiting room on a Tuesday night in February, and whose wife, exactly, Emma Reyes was. She came out 40 minutes later with her wrist wrapped in a compression bandage and a prescription for ibuprofen and instructions to follow up with an orthopedic specialist if the swelling didn't decrease in 72 hours. The attending physician had been unusually attentive. 2 nurses had checked on her more times than strictly necessary. Someone had brought her a cup of hot tea without being asked, setting it on the tray beside her with a small, careful smile. Emma had not connected any of this to the man in the waiting room until she walked back through the double doors and found him exactly where she had left him. Sitting. Still. Coat still on. Phone nowhere in evidence. Just waiting, the way he had said he would. She stopped in the doorway for a moment, struck by the particular unreality of it, this composed, expensive-looking stranger who had claimed her as his wife and then apparently had nothing better to do on a Wednesday night than sit in a hospital waiting room, keeping a promise to someone he'd met 40 minutes ago. "You're still here," she said. "I said I would be." She crossed the room and sat beside him, because her options were limited and her wrist hurt, and the ibuprofen they'd given her hadn't kicked in yet, and the idea of walking back out into the February dark alone felt heavier than it had 2 hours ago. "How is it?" he asked, nodding at her wrist. "Sprained, not broken. I have to keep it wrapped for a week." He nodded once. Emma looked at him sideways in the way she'd been doing since she sat down the first time, angled observation, like looking directly at him required more commitment than she was currently prepared to make. "You said you know the administrator," she said. He waited. "You own this hospital." He was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of denial or discomfort. Something more precise. "My family has a significant interest in the facility, yes," he said. Emma processed this. "So you're not just a stranger who was in the waiting room by coincidence." "No one is anywhere entirely by coincidence," he said. "I was here for a meeting. It ran late. I was walking through when you came through the entrance." She thought about this, about the exact choreography of it, her 6-block walk through the snow, his late meeting, the specific moment she had stood up from her chair and stumbled backward. She had spent 10 months carefully reconstructing her life along rational, manageable lines. Predictable shifts at predictable jobs. A small apartment with a working lock and no one else's name on the lease. A life organized around the principle that if she controlled enough variables, nothing would blindside her again. And then, February had sent her an icy sidewalk, and a sprained wrist, and Derek's smile across a waiting room, and a stranger who said please was sufficient reason to call a woman his wife. She was not a person who believed in signs. She had learned, specifically and painfully, not to be. But something about the evening felt like it was trying to tell her something she wasn't ready to hear. "Can I ask you something else?" she said. He waited again. He was very good at waiting. It should have felt passive. It didn't. It felt like attention, concentrated and complete. "Does this happen to you often?" she asked, women asking you to pretend. "No," he said. "Never?" He looked at her directly. "Never," he said, "and I've never agreed before." Emma absorbed this. So why tonight? The gray eyes held hers for a moment longer than was strictly conversational. "I already told you," he said. "You said please," she remembered. He nodded once. She shook her head slowly, not in disagreement, just in the particular bewilderment of someone trying to integrate information that didn't fit the existing framework. "That's a very strange reason," she said. "Most true things are," he said. Outside, the snow had slowed. Through the tall windows she could see the parking structure lights more clearly now, the orange blur sharpened into distinct fixtures, the outlines of parked cars emerging from the white. Chicago was doing what it always did after heavy snow, going quiet in a way the city almost never managed, the usual urban hum muffled under 8 inches of February silence. "I should call a cab," she said. "Or try the app again. I'll drive you," he said. Emma looked at him. "You don't have to do that." "I know." She considered the offer with the careful, slightly exhausted risk assessment of a woman who had spent 3 years learning to read the difference between genuine and performed. She looked at his hands, resting loose and open on his knees. At the quality of his stillness, which was not the stillness of someone containing something, but the stillness of someone who simply did not need to perform restlessness to prove they were alive. She thought about the nurse who had brought her tea, the attending physician's careful attention, the way the intake desk had processed her ahead of a 2-hour queue without visible explanation. This was a man other people were careful around. She could feel the shape of it without seeing it directly, the way you could feel a current in water before you understood which direction it was moving. That recognition should have alarmed her. Instead, and she would think about this later, lying in her small Pilsen apartment, listening to the snow settle against the window, instead, it made something in her chest loosen slightly, like a knot releasing one loop, but not the whole tangle. She stood, put on her coat carefully, favoring her wrapped wrist. "Okay," she said. "Thank you." He stood in one motion, unhurried and complete. They walked toward the exit together. Through the glass doors, Emma could see a black car idling at the curb, a driver standing outside it in the cold with the patient, professional stillness of someone accustomed to waiting. She had not seen Elias make a call or send a text. The car was simply there. She filed this away alongside everything else about him that did not quite fit the categories she had available. The doors opened. Cold air hit her face, sharp and clean. Beside her, Elias paused. In the parking lot, under one of the amber security lights, a large black dog sat perfectly still in the snow, watching them. Emma glanced at it. Then at him. "Is that yours?" she asked. He looked at the dog for a moment. "No," he said, but the dog's eyes, catching the light at a particular angle, reflected back something that was not quite the right color for a dog. And when Elias looked at it, some unspoken communication passed between them that Emma could not parse, and would not remember clearly later, only the impression of it, like waking from a dream and retaining the feeling without the content. The dog stood, turned, and disappeared between the parked cars without a sound. Emma pulled her coat tighter. "Shall we?" Elias said. She walked with him toward the waiting car, her boots crunching in the packed snow, her wrist throbbing steadily, her mind quietly, insistently telling her that this night was not over, and that the stranger beside her was not what he appeared, and that she should probably care about both of those things considerably more than she currently did. She didn't. The car door opened. She got in. He did not make small talk. Emma had braced for it. The polite, obligatory conversation of a car ride with someone you don't know. The weather, the neighborhood. The careful exchange of surface-level information that functions as social lubricant without actually connecting anything. She had prepared minor versions of herself to offer. The laundromat job, the diner shifts, the Pilsen apartment, the small curated facts that answered questions without revealing anything. But Elias sat on the opposite end of the back seat and looked out the window at Chicago, passing in the snow-muffled dark, and said nothing, and the silence was not uncomfortable. It was the specific quality of silence that exists between people who have already established something, even if neither of them could have named what that something was. She watched the city move past the window on her side. Pilsen, at night in February. The murals on the viaducts frosted over, their colors muted under the white. The tamale cart that was always on her corner even in the cold, the owner's face obscured by a scarf wound twice around. The corner store with the hand-lettered sign in the window that had not changed in the 3 years she'd been living in this neighborhood. Small, familiar, manageable things. The car stopped outside her building. It was a 3-flat brick, the front steps recently salted, the porch light on. She had checked the porch light obsessively for the first 4 months after she left Derek, that small orange glow confirming night after night that she had a door to come home to. She turned to say thank you and found him already looking at her. The light from the street caught his face at an angle, and she noticed, for the first time, that he looked tired. Not in the surface way of someone who had missed a night of sleep, but in the deeper way, the way that accumulated over time and settled into something structural. Like exhaustion had become load-bearing. She recognized it because she had seen it in her own face enough times to know what it looked like when it stopped being temporary. "Thank you," she said, "for all of it. The waiting room, the ride. You didn't have to." "I wanted to," he said. It was the first time he had said that. Not I know, not the patient non-answers that acknowledged her gratitude without absorbing it. "I wanted to." Present tense, specific and deliberate. She held onto the door handle without opening it. The ibuprofen had finally reached her wrist. The pain had flattened from sharp to dull, which made thinking easier. "Can I ask you one more thing?" she said. He waited. "When Derek said we were together for 3 years, you said you'd do the math on the overlap. That implied we'd been married 8 months before the 3 years ended." "Yes. You calculated that in real time." He said nothing. "That means you were listening carefully enough to his claim to construct a counter-narrative that contradicted it internally," she said, in about 4 seconds. He looked at her with the gray eyes that did not quite resolve into one shade. "You noticed that," he said. She had a degree in English literature from University of Illinois, Chicago, that she had never done anything with, because rent was immediate and literature was not. But she had spent her life paying attention to language, to the gap between what people said and what they constructed, to the architecture of sentences and what they revealed about the mind that built them. "I noticed things," she said. Something shifted in his expression. Small, like the first tremor before weather changed. "So do I," he said. She opened the car door. Cold air came in, sharp as a held breath. "Good night, Elias," she said. "Good night, Emma." She got out, walked up the salted steps, found her keys without fumbling, which felt like a small victory. She was at the door when she heard the window of the car come down behind her. She turned. He was leaning slightly toward the open window. The snow had started again, light and purposeless, the kind that didn't accumulate but caught the light. "Your emergency contact form," he said. "The one you said you'd fix tomorrow." She waited. "Put whoever makes you feel safe," he said, "not whoever used to." The window went up. The car pulled away from the curb, quiet and black in the snow, and Emma stood on her porch for a moment watching it go, her keys in her hand, her wrist wrapped, her heart doing something complicated and unnamed in her chest. She went inside. She did not sleep well. Her wrist kept her at the surface, the dull ache of it, and beneath that was the evening replaying in non-linear fragments. Derek's unchanged smile, the dog in the parking lot with the wrong colored eyes, Elias's hand at the small of her back, present and unbothered. I wanted to. Put whoever makes you feel safe. She got up at 6 because the alarm was set for 6 regardless, and the laundromat opened at 7, and there were 32 machines that needed to be checked before the first customers arrived. She made coffee, stood at the kitchen window watching the alley behind her building, where the snow had drifted against the fence in shapes that looked briefly intentional, like someone had arranged them. She thought about what she knew about Elias Vane. His family had a significant interest in a hospital. He had a driver. His late meeting had run past 10 on a Wednesday night. He had said please was enough reason, and he had not asked for anything in return. Not her number, not an explanation, not gratitude beyond the ordinary. She thought about what she didn't know. The list was considerably longer. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She looked at it expecting the laundromat's scheduling app or a reminder about the ibuprofen timing. It was an unknown number. She almost didn't answer. She answered. Emma Reyes, a woman's voice said, professional and warm. "My name is Catherine. I'm calling on behalf of Elias Vane. He wanted to make sure you were able to reach an orthopedic specialist for your wrist. We've arranged an appointment at Northwestern Memorial this afternoon at 2, if that works with your schedule. There's no cost. It's been handled, and a car will come to you if you need it." Emma sat down on her kitchen chair. "He didn't have to do that," she said. "No." Catherine agreed pleasantly. "He didn't." There was a pause in which Emma understood that Catherine had probably made this kind of call before, and that it was not her place to editorialize. "Tell him thank you," Emma said. "Of course. Should I confirm the 2 o'clock?" Emma looked at her wrapped wrist, thought about the orthopedic specialist follow-up she had been quietly calculating how to afford. "Yes," she said. "Please." She hung up. Outside the kitchen window, the snow in the alley had caught the early morning light and was doing something briefly, absurdly beautiful, each crystal surface returning the pale gold of a Chicago winter sunrise, the whole drifted arrangement of it glowing from within like it was lit by something other than sun. Emma drank her coffee and thought about a man who owned hospitals and sent cars, and had said please was enough. She thought about 3 years of being told she expected too much. She thought about the dog with the wrong colored eyes. Then she got up, put on her coat, and went to check 32 machines. Because the laundromat opened at 7, and her life ran on schedules she had built herself out of wreckage, and she was not, she reminded herself, a person who believed in signs. The orthopedic appointment was at 2. She went. The specialist was on the 14th floor of Northwestern Memorial, in a suite that looked less like a medical office and more like somewhere decisions were made rather than just treatments administered. The waiting area had real plants, the living kind, and chairs that were upholstered rather than plastic, and a view of the lake through a window that took up most of the east wall. Emma sat facing the lake. February had done something unusual to it. The near shore was frozen in ridged, chaotic formations. Pressure ice heaved up in shapes that looked violent and accidental, but further out the water was dark and moving, shifting under a sky the color of old pewter. The line where the ice ended and the open water began was not clean. It was complicated, fractured, a border that couldn't decide what it was. She found she couldn't stop looking at it. The specialist, a Dr. Harmon, was thorough and unhurried in a way that private medicine sometimes manufactured and sometimes actually delivered. She examined the wrist, ordered an imaging scan, confirmed the sprain, and gave Emma a specific, detailed recovery plan that included a follow-up in 1 week. At no point did anyone mention billing. At no point did anyone hand her forms to fill out, clipboards with insurance information or payment authorizations. Emma had brought her insurance card, the minimal coverage she paid for herself, $47 a month for the comfort of having something to hand over, and no one asked for it. She mentioned this to the woman at the front desk as she was leaving. "It's been taken care of," the woman said, with the same pleasant professional warmth Catherine had used on the phone. Same phrasing, same tone. Emma wondered if there was a script. She went down 14 floors and out through the main entrance into the cold and stood on the sidewalk. A black car was at the curb. Not necessarily the same one. She had no way of knowing. But the driver was standing outside it with the same patient professional stillness, and when she came through the door, he looked up and opened the rear door without being addressed. Emma stood on the sidewalk for a moment. She was not a person who accepted things easily. She had learned, in the careful way that people learn things from experience rather than advice, that things given without stated terms still had terms. That someone's generosity was often the opening bid in a negotiation she hadn't agreed to enter. She was also standing on a sidewalk in February with a sprained wrist and a 7-block walk to the red line. She got in the car. They were moving through the near north side when the partition came down and the driver said, "Mr. Vane wanted to know if you had eaten. There's a restaurant he uses near your neighborhood. He thought you might want lunch." Emma looked at the back of the driver's head. "Is Mr. Vane going to be there?" she asked. The driver was quiet for a moment, in the way people were quiet when they were trying to answer honestly without editorializing. "He said that was entirely your preference," the driver said. Emma looked out the window. She thought about her preference. "Tell him yes," she said. The restaurant was on 18th Street, small and warm, with the kind of interior that suggested it had been exactly this way for 40 years and had no intention of updating. Red leather booths. Black and white photographs on the walls. A bar along one side with bottles arranged in no particular order, and a bartender who was reading a newspaper and did not look up when they came in. Elias was in the last booth. He stood when she came in. She noticed that. The standing, the waiting until she'd slid into the seat across from him, before he sat back down. She noticed these things the way she'd been noticing things about him since the emergency room, carefully and sideways, trying to build a picture from peripheral observation. "How's the wrist?" he asked. "Sprained. Confirmed," she said. "Dr. Harmon was thorough. Thank you for that. You didn't have to. You're going to keep saying that," he observed. "Probably," she agreed. "Because it keeps being true." The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but the shadow of one. The suggestion that a smile was somewhere in the architecture of his face and occasionally made its presence known without fully arriving. A server appeared. Someone who clearly knew him, who set down water and a small menu and said Mr. Vane in the tone of someone speaking to a person they wanted to appear casual around and hadn't quite managed. Elias ordered without looking at the menu. Emma ordered the same thing because the menu was in her hands and the words were not assembling into meaning, and her wrist was throbbing at a medium grade, and she was sitting across from a man she had met 18 hours ago who had paid for her medical care and sent a car and arranged lunch, and she was trying to hold all of that in her mind without letting it reorganize her. "Tell me something true about yourself," she said. He looked at her. She held his gaze. "Something you don't tell most people," she said. Not as a trade. Just because I'd like to know one real thing. He was quiet for a moment that was long enough to feel considered. I've been in Chicago for 9 years, he said. Before that, I was in Europe for a long time. I don't talk about what I did there. That's 2 things, she said. And a deliberate omission. Yes, he said. She accepted this. Your turn, he said. Emma looked at the table, at her wrapped wrist resting on the edge of it. I used to want to be a writer, she said. Not journalism or anything practical. Fiction. Novels. I thought for a very long time that I would figure out how to do both, work enough to survive, and write enough to eventually not have to work to survive. What happened? He asked. She considered how to answer that. There were several true answers. The money, the time, Derek's particular talent for making her ambitions feel embarrassing, the way exhaustion accumulated until it filled the space where desire used to live. I stopped believing I was worth the risk, she said. Elias looked at her with the layered gray eyes and said nothing, and the nothing was not empty. It had weight. It had the quality of someone listening so completely that the silence after your words felt inhabited rather than vacant. The food arrived. They ate. Emma found she was hungry in a way she hadn't registered before sitting down. The real hunger of someone who'd been running on adrenaline and ibuprofen since the previous evening. The food was simple and exactly right. The kind of meal that made no claims beyond being good. I'd like to see you again, Elias said. Emma set down her fork. She looked at him across the red leather booth in the 40-year-old restaurant on 18th Street. Why, she asked, and she meant it as a real question, not coyness. She wanted to know the actual architecture of the answer. He met her eyes. Because you notice things, he said. And you ask for what you actually mean, and you said please and meant it, and I haven't had a reason to stay somewhere in a very long time. Emma was quiet. Outside, Chicago moved past the window, a woman pushing a stroller through the packed snow, 2 men loading something heavy into a truck, a child with a red coat who stopped and looked up at the sky for no visible reason and then kept walking. Okay, Emma said. He waited. Once more, she said. Coffee. Somewhere public. He nodded. And then I ask you the thing I actually want to ask you, she said. What thing, he said. She picked up her fork. What you actually are, she said simply. Because I notice things, and there are several things about you that don't add up, and I'd rather ask than keep pretending I haven't noticed. The corner of his mouth moved again, further this time, almost completing. Coffee, he said. And then you can ask. She nodded. They finished lunch. Outside on the sidewalk before the car came, he stood beside her in the cold, and the afternoon light caught the angle of his face, and for just a moment, just one fraction of a winter afternoon, she could have sworn his shadow fell in a direction that didn't match the sun. She looked. The shadow was normal. Of course it was. She was tired. She was on ibuprofen. She was not a person who believed in signs. The car came. She went home. She did not, that night or the night after, manage to convince herself that she had imagined it. Coffee was Saturday. Emma spent Friday not thinking about it, which meant she thought about it constantly in the specific fragmented way of someone trying to enforce normalcy over something that was resisting the effort. She worked the laundromat shift. She worked the diner shift. She came home and wrapped her wrist again and made soup from what was in the cabinet and sat at her kitchen table with her laptop open to a document she hadn't added to in 8 months. The document was 43 pages long. It was the beginning of something that she had not yet allowed herself to call a novel, because calling it a novel made it real, and real things could fail in ways that unnamed things could not. She looked at the last line she'd written. She did not add to it. She closed the laptop and went to bed and lay in the dark listening to the radiator tick and thought about a man whose shadow had briefly fallen wrong. Saturday arrived the way winter Saturdays arrived in Chicago. Gray and determined, the sky the color of unfinished concrete, the cold the kind that was not dramatic, but simply absolute. Settled in for the duration without any interest in negotiating. He had texted her the address. The text had arrived Friday morning from the same number as Catherine's call, which meant it was probably Catherine's number, or an office line, or something that was not his personal phone. She had noted this without knowing what to make of it, and had texted back simply, Saturday at 10 works. The coffee shop was in Wicker Park. Not a chain. A narrow storefront with steamed windows and mismatched furniture and the particular atmosphere of a place where people came to be alone in public, which Emma had always found to be one of Chicago's underappreciated amenities. He was already there when she arrived. Of course he was. He had a table in the back, against the wall, facing the door. She noticed the facing the door, filed it away with the other things she'd filed. He had coffee. He had not ordered for her, which she also noticed, which meant he understood the difference between presumption and consideration. She ordered at the counter and came to the table and sat down across from him. He looked the same. That was the first thing she registered. Not different in daylight, not diminished or inflated by the context change the way people sometimes were when you moved them out of the circumstances where you'd first encountered them. The same quality of stillness, the same gray eyes that resolved into layers rather than a single shade. You came, he said. I said I would, she pointed out. The corner of his mouth, the almost smile. How's the wrist? He asked. Improving, she said. Dr. Harmon's plan is working. Good, she wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. Let the warmth come through. I did some research, she said. He waited. Elias Vane, she said. There isn't much. Which is interesting for someone with a significant interest in a major Chicago hospital and apparently a building with his family name on it on Michigan Avenue and whatever the Chicago Business Journal was alluding to in 2019 when they mentioned a Vane Group without actually finishing the sentence. He looked at her steadily. You found the Business Journal piece, he said. It was 4 lines, she said. And then it just stopped. Mid-sentence, like someone had pulled it. He said nothing. I'm not trying to alarm you, she said. I'm not a threat. I work at a laundromat and a diner and I have 43 pages of an unfinished novel and a sprained wrist and approximately no leverage over anyone. I just notice things. I told you I notice things. You did, he said. So I noticed that you don't exist online the way people exist online. No social media, no photographs I could find, no interviews, no alumni pages. There's a LinkedIn that hasn't been updated in 11 years. There's a real estate record from 2015. And then there are these peripheral references, other people mentioning Vane Group or the Vane family, but always in a way where you're just off the edge of the frame. She took a breath. That's either very careful privacy management, she said, or something else. He looked at her for a long moment. Which do you think it is? He said. Both, she said. I think it's very careful privacy management because it's something else. He looked down at his coffee cup. It was the first time she had seen him look away from something rather than at it, and the shift was small, but it registered. You said you'd ask me, he said. At coffee. I'm asking, she said. Outside the steamed windows of the coffee shop, Wicker Park moved through its Saturday morning. She could see it in blurred shapes through the condensation, people and dogs and the occasional car, the ordinary mobile world of a city going about its weekend. Inside, Elias was quiet for a moment that extended past comfortable and into something else, not tense, but weighted, the silence of someone deciding how much of a true thing to say. My family, he said finally, has been in this country for a long time. Longer than the records that exist for us would suggest. How long? She said. He looked up at her. A very long time, he said. She held his gaze. The woman at the next table laughed at something on her phone. The espresso machine behind the counter screamed briefly and then went quiet. Snow had started again outside, visible as a thickening of the gray beyond the windows. "Are you going to tell me something impossible?" she said. He looked at her with the layered gray eyes and the tiredness that lived deep in his face and said, "I'm going to tell you something true. Whether you find it impossible is up to you." Emma set down her coffee cup. "Okay," she said. He told her. Not all of it. Not the full architecture of 3 centuries, not the politics of the territories or the structure of the families, or the careful, painstaking management of existing alongside a human world that did not officially know you existed. He told her the essential shape of it, the thing that answered her question about what he was, in the plain declarative sentences of someone who had learned a long time ago that elaborate framing was less useful than direct truth. When he finished, Emma was quiet. The coffee shop moved around them. The espresso machine went through 2 more cycles. The woman at the next table packed up her things and left, and was replaced by a man with a laptop and headphones. "Say something," he said. She looked at him. "The dog in the parking lot," she said. He nodded. "The shadow," she said. "Yes," he said. "The way everyone in the waiting room went still," she said. "Not scared of you exactly, more like calibrated around you, like fish when something large enters the water." He was watching her carefully. "How long have you been in Chicago specifically?" she asked. 9 years, he said. "As I told you." "Where before that?" "Vienna," he said. "Before that, longer ago, other places." She nodded slowly. "You said you'd been searching for something," she said, remembering what he'd told her at lunch. "A reason to stay." "Yes." "Is that what this is?" she said. "Me. Is that what you think I am?" He was quiet for a moment. "I don't know yet," he said. "And I'm not going to tell you that you are to try to keep you here. I'm going to tell you that I haven't had coffee with anyone on a Saturday morning in 9 years, and that when you said please in that waiting room, I felt something I had stopped expecting to feel." "What?" she said. "Interested," he said simply, "in what happened next." Emma looked at the man across from her. 3 centuries old, he had said. She ran the math involuntarily, the way she'd run Derek's math in the waiting room, 1700s, the country not yet a country, Chicago not yet a city. This man already old in ways she had no reference for. She should be afraid. She catalogued herself carefully for fear, the way she had learned to check her internal weather since leaving Derek, honest assessment rather than wishful. What she found was not fear. It was the particular feeling of standing at the frozen edge of the lake, looking at the place where the ice ended and the dark water began, the complicated fractured border that couldn't decide what it was. She recognized it. She realized, from the window of the specialist's office. She had been looking at it for a long time. "I need to think," she said. "Of course," he said. "I'm not saying no," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm saying I need to think. Because I've spent 10 months rebuilding a life that makes sense and you don't make sense, and I need to figure out what to do with that." He nodded. He did not try to make it easier. He did not offer reassurances or minimize the strangeness of what he'd told her, or perform patience in a way that was actually pressure, wearing patience as clothing. He just nodded. She finished her coffee. She put on her coat. At the door she turned and looked at him one more time. He was watching her go, his hands loose on the table, his face composed and tired and, she thought, in this gray winter light, genuinely uncertain, not performing uncertainty as a tactic, actually uncertain. She thought that might be the most human thing about him. She walked out into the Chicago cold. She thought for 4 days. She did not contact him during those 4 days. She did not know if he was waiting to hear from her, or if he had already moved on in whatever way a 300-year-old person moved on from a conversation over coffee that had not resolved. She found she could not imagine what his 4 days looked like. The life behind the stillness, the hours of it, what he did with his evenings in the 9th-floor apartment she had found a record of on North Lake Shore Drive, what silence felt like to someone who had been accumulating it for 3 centuries. She thought about her 43 pages. She opened the document on Tuesday night after her diner shift and read all of it from the beginning for the first time in 8 months. It was better than she remembered. That surprised her, the way it sometimes did, how fear of failure had a way of making your actual work seem worse in memory than it was on the page. She added 2 paragraphs. They were not good paragraphs, but they were present on the page where before there had been nothing, and she saved the document and closed the laptop and felt something she recognized after a moment as the specific sensation of a door opening inward. On Wednesday, she called her friend Rosa, who worked at the public library on Halsted and had known Emma since before Derek and knew what after Derek looked like and had an opinion about everything that Emma had learned to trust, because Rosa's opinions were based on observation rather than preference. "I need to tell you something impossible," Emma said. Rosa was quiet for a moment. "Is this the good kind of impossible, or the kind where I'm going to need to come over there?" Rosa said. Emma thought about it. "I don't know yet," she said. She told Rosa. Not everything. The essential shape of it, the thing that answered the question of what he was. She told it the way Elias had told her, in plain declarative sentences without elaborate framing, because that was how she had received it, and it seemed like the honest way to pass it along. Rosa was quiet for a long time after. "The Vampire King," Rosa said finally. "He didn't use the word king," Emma said. "He said sovereign of the territory, but I think it amounts to the same. And he just told you." Over coffee, Emma confirmed. Another pause. "How do you feel?" Rosa asked. "That's the thing," Emma said. "I've been waiting to feel scared, and I don't. I feel like I'm standing at the edge of something, and I can see that it's deep, and I can't see the bottom, but I'm not afraid of the depth. I'm just trying to figure out if I trust my own judgment enough to step toward it." Rosa was quiet again. "Then, Emma, after Derek you said your judgment was broken. I know. Do you still think that?" Emma looked at the kitchen window, at the alley dark and snow-edged. "No," she said. "I think Derek convinced me it was broken, because it suited him for me to think so. I think my judgment is actually fine. I just stopped trusting it." Silence. Then Rosa said, "Call him." Emma called him on Thursday morning. Not Catherine's number. She had texted back to that number after Saturday's coffee, and he had replied, one message, from the same number, but in a way that felt different, more direct, fewer words. She used that number now. It rang twice. "Emma," he said. She had not expected to feel anything particular at hearing her name and his voice after 4 days, and she felt something particular. The specific warmth of being known, of a person who carried your name in their mouth like they'd been keeping it carefully. "I've been thinking," she said. "I know," he said. "I want to ask you something." "Ask." She sat down at her kitchen table. The 43-page document was closed on the laptop, but she knew it was there. The 2 new paragraphs added Tuesday night still warm from being recently inhabited. "Do you think it's possible," she said, "for someone to be afraid of the wrong things? To spend a long time protecting themselves from one kind of danger while walking completely unguarded toward another kind?" "Yes," he said. "I think that's one of the more common human experiences. And the other kind, the one you're unguarded toward, is it always bad?" He was quiet. "No," he said. Emma looked at the kitchen window. "I'd like to see you again," she said. "Not because I've decided anything, not because I'm not still thinking, but because I noticed that when I was sitting across from you, I felt like myself in a way I haven't in a while, and I'd like to see if that's real, or if it was just the adrenaline of a very strange week." "It's real," he said. "You can't know that yet." "No," he agreed. but I have better instincts than most." She almost smiled. "Friday," she said. "Dinner this time." "Yes," he said. "Somewhere I choose," she said. "Not somewhere you use." He paused. "Then, wherever you want." "There's a place on Blue Island Avenue," she said. "It's not expensive. They make the best pozole in Chicago, and the tables are plastic, and the television is always on, and it's nothing like anywhere you probably go." "That sounds," he said, and paused, like he was looking for the right word. "Real," she offered. "Yes," he said. "That." She smiled. For the first time since Wednesday of the previous week, the kind of smile that didn't have to be manufactured, that arrived without being summoned. "Friday at 7, she said. "I'll send you the address." She hung up. She opened the laptop. She wrote 6 pages. They were not perfect pages, but they were true. And they moved, and they were the most she had written in a single sitting in 3 years. And when she finally stopped, her wrist was aching, and it was past midnight, and outside Chicago had gone quiet under a new fall of snow. She saved the document. She went to bed. She slept, for the first time in a week, without lying awake listening to the radiator, and the thing she felt before she fell under was not happiness exactly, but its quieter precursor. The state that precedes happiness, when the ground has been prepared, but the thing itself hasn't arrived yet. Possibility, she thought, was the word. She had forgotten what it tasted like. Dinner was not what she expected, which meant it was exactly what it needed to be. She had expected him to arrive in the black car, in the expensive coat, carrying the composed, unreadable quality she had catalogued across 3 encounters, and learned to navigate the way you learned to navigate a room that was mostly dark, by feel and peripheral vision. She had not expected him to arrive 5 minutes early and be standing on the sidewalk outside the restaurant on Blue Island Avenue, in a coat that was still expensive but less emphatically so, hands in his pockets, looking at the street with the specific attention of someone encountering a neighborhood that was new to them and finding it genuinely interesting rather than performing interest. He was not looking at his phone. She noticed that. She had not seen him look at a phone once across all their interactions. She filed it away. He saw her half a block away, and there was a moment, just a fraction of a winter evening's light, where his face did something unguarded. Not the almost smile, not the controlled neutrality. Something more immediate, a brief uncovering before the composure returned, like a window opening and closing. She filed that away too. They went inside. The restaurant was exactly as she had described it. Plastic tables in primary colors, a television mounted high on the wall showing a soccer game with the sound low, the smell of chile and pork and corn masa that hit you at the door and made something inside you relax before you'd consciously decided to. Norma, who had been running the place for 22 years and knew Emma by name and never commented on the gap between the last time Emma had come in with someone and now, showed them to a table in the corner without being asked and set down menus that were laminated and slightly sticky at the edges. He looked at the menu with the same careful attention he directed at everything. "Get the pozole rojo," she said. "And the tamales if you haven't eaten." He looked up at her over the menu. The overhead light was warm and yellow, and it did something different to his face than fluorescent or winter daylight, made the tiredness less visible, brought something else forward. "Have you been coming here long?" he asked. "Since I moved to Pilsen," she said. 6 years. Norma let me run a tab once when I was between paychecks. I never forgot that." He looked at the table for a moment. "Small kindnesses," he said. She waited. "They accumulate," he said. "More than the other kind." She thought about that. "In 3 centuries," she said. "You think kindness accumulates more than cruelty?" He looked at her directly. "I know it does," he said. "Cruelty leaves marks. Kindness leaves structure. The marks fade. The structure holds." Emma looked at him across the plastic table and the yellow light with the soccer game in the background, and thought that he had said something true, and that the trueness of it sat in her chest differently than things usually did. Norma came. They ordered. The food arrived with the particular speed of a kitchen that had been making the same things for 22 years and had achieved an efficiency that no amount of ambition could replicate. They ate, and she asked him questions that were different from the ones she'd asked before. Not what are you, not what is the architecture of your existence, but the smaller ones, the ones that revealed shape without requiring confession. What do you do in the evenings? She asked. Read. Mostly, he said. The city at night. Sometimes I walk. Where? Anywhere. I know Chicago very well by now. Every neighborhood. Every neighborhood, he confirmed. She thought about him walking through Pilsen at night, through her streets, past the murals and the corner stores and Norma's place, and felt something that was not quite possessiveness, but was adjacent to it. Do you ever get lonely? She asked. He was quiet for a moment, with the careful quality of someone giving a true answer rather than a comfortable one. There's a kind of loneliness, he said, that you stop noticing after a while, like a sound that's always there. You acclimate to it, and then something interrupts the sound, and suddenly you can hear the silence by contrast and you realize how loud it's been. She held his gaze. Wednesday, she said. In the waiting room. Yes, he said. She nodded slowly. She told him about Derek then, not as a warning or a disclosure or a thing she was required to say before proceeding, just because it was true, and he had told her true things and it seemed like the appropriate exchange. She told him the shape of 3 years, how it had worked, the precise mechanism of it, the way confidence could be dismantled so gradually that by the time you noticed the structure was gone, you couldn't remember what had been holding it up. He listened the way he did everything. Completely. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You rebuilt it yourself. I had to. She said, No, he said, not had to. Chose to. There's a difference. She looked at him. Plenty of people don't, he said. It's not inevitable. You chose it. She sat with that for a moment. The soccer game shifted to something else on the television. Norma refilled their water without being flagged. Outside, Blue Island Avenue moved through its Friday evening. People coming out of the cold into the warm light of restaurants and bars. The particular exhale of a neighborhood at the end of a work week. Can I tell you something I haven't told anyone? He said. Yes, she said. I came to Chicago 9 years ago because I was tired, he said. Not physically. The other kind. The kind where you've been doing the same thing for so long that you've stopped believing it connects to anything real. I had managed territories and navigated politics and maintained careful distances for decades, and I was tired of the distance. I thought Chicago might be different, smaller in some way that matters even if it isn't small. More. Human. She waited. And it was, he said. But I still kept the distance. Old habit. Old protection. He looked at the table. The thing about existing for a long time is that the strategies that kept you safe become the walls of the life you're living. And eventually you stop being able to tell the difference between protection and isolation. Emma thought about a 43-page document she hadn't opened for 8 months. I know that feeling, she said quietly. He looked at her. I know, he said. They left the restaurant at 9. Norma waved them off from behind the counter and said to Emma in Spanish that he had a good face, and Emma said in Spanish that she knew, and Norma laughed, and Elias looked between them with the expression of someone who understood more than he was letting on. On the sidewalk, the cold was immediate and total. They stood facing each other. Can I ask you one more thing? Emma said. He waited. Wednesday, the waiting room. You said you felt interested in what happened next. Yes. Do you still? Do you still? He looked at her in the winter streetlight. This man who was 300 years old and tired in a specific structural way, and had walked alone through every Chicago neighborhood, and had chosen to be honest with her across 4 conversations without performing any of it. More, he said. More than Wednesday. More than Wednesday, he confirmed. Emma stood in the cold and felt the possibility she had felt going to sleep Thursday night, felt it more concretely now, the ground of it under her feet rather than just the idea of it. She reached out with her unwrapped hand, her good hand, and touched his arm once briefly, the way you touched something you were deciding whether to hold. Okay, she said. He was very still. Okay, she said again, differently this time. Like it meant something. She walked home. 6 blocks through the Chicago cold, her breath making small clouds, the streetlights making halos in the dry winter air. Behind her she did not hear footsteps, but she had the particular feeling, distinct and undeniable, that she was not walking alone. She did not look back. But she smiled. The next 3 weeks moved differently than weeks had moved for Emma in a long time. Not faster, not with the giddy, destabilizing speed of something that was happening too much. More like the difference between water running over rock and water finding the channel it was meant for. The same force, different direction, different feeling entirely. They met on Tuesdays and Fridays. Not because they had negotiated a schedule, but because those were the evenings when Emma's shifts ended early enough to have a real evening. And Elias, when she explained this, had simply arranged himself around it, without comment, as if her laundromat hours were as reasonable a framework as any for organizing time. She learned things. He had read everything. She meant this in the way you could only mean it about someone who had been reading for 300 years. Not comprehensively. No one could read everything, but widely enough that there was almost no book she mentioned that he hadn't encountered in some form. Sometimes the original language, sometimes a translation he'd read before the English version existed. He had opinions. Quiet ones, but genuine. He thought Middlemarch was the finest novel written in English and was willing to defend this. He thought Chicago's architecture was underappreciated relative to its actual importance, and could explain in specific structural detail why the Loop was more interesting than most people gave it credit for. He thought Pozole Rojo was superior to Pozole Verde, and had maintained this position across all evidence to the contrary that Emma had presented. She told him about the novel. Not all 43 pages, just the shape of it, the story she was trying to tell, the reason it mattered. She had never told anyone but Rosa, not even in the Derek years, because Derek had a way of receiving her ambitions that made her feel the ambition rather than the work, feel how naive it was to think she could do a thing like this. Elias listened to the shape of it. Then, he said, "What's stopping you from finishing it?" "Fear," she said. "Of what?" he said. "That it won't be as good as I need it to be," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Can I say something that might be irritating?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "You've spent 3 years not writing it," he said, "because it might not be good enough. But not writing it is a certainty. It's already definitely not finished. The other outcome is only a possibility, but it's the only one with any future in it." Emma looked at him. "That's irritating," she said. "I know," he said. "And completely correct," she said. "I know," he said again, with the almost smile. She went home that night and wrote 12 pages. He met Rosa on the 3rd Tuesday. Rosa had insisted, with the particular insistence of a best friend who had heard an impossible thing over the phone and spent 2 weeks formulating questions, and Emma had arranged it the way you arranged things, when you were not sure if two important parts of your life would survive contact with each other. They survived contact. Rosa asked Elias the questions Emma had already asked, and several she hadn't, and Elias answered them with the same plain honest brevity he'd brought to everything, and Rosa watched him across the table with the observational intensity of someone with a library science degree and a very specific idea of what reliable sources looked like. Afterward, Rosa walked Emma to the corner. "Okay," Rosa said. "That's it," Emma said. "Just okay." "What do you want me to say?" Rosa said. "He's 300 years old, and he claims a major Chicago hospital, and he's clearly been alone for a very long time, and he looks at you like you're the first interesting thing that's happened in decades. What am I going to argue with about any of that?" Emma thought about the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't looking. She had caught it twice, in the restaurant light, in the reflection of a window on a Tuesday evening on Milwaukee Avenue, the expression he wore when he was not performing composure because he didn't know he needed to. Unguarded and intent, and something older than loneliness moving towards something it didn't have a name for yet. "You're not going to argue," Emma said. "No," Rosa agreed. "But Emma." Emma waited. "Be careful with your own heart," Rosa said. "Not because he'll hurt it. I don't actually think he will. But because I know you, and when you love something you go all the way in, and that's not a flaw, but it means the landing matters." Emma thought about the frozen edge of the lake, the complicated fractured border between ice and open water. "I know where I'm standing," she said. Rosa looked at her for a long moment. "Yeah," Rosa said finally. "I think you do." The thing she had not told Rosa, had not told anyone, was what had happened on the second Tuesday. They had been walking. She had suggested it because the evening was cold but clear, the kind of Chicago winter night where the sky was actually visible, stars and a near full moon over the lake, and she had been inside all day and needed to move. They walked along the lakefront path, the one that ran close enough to the water that you could see the ice formations, the heaved and fractured pressure ridges she had looked at from the specialist's window. Elias had been telling her something about Vienna in the 1890s, one of the rare occasions he spoke at any length about the before, and she had been listening and watching the ice, and they had both gone quiet at the same moment. In the quiet, she had felt something. Not a sound, not quite a feeling, more like a change in atmospheric pressure, the way the air before a storm shifted its weight. She had looked up, and there were 3 men at the end of the path, between them and the next set of park lights, standing in a configuration that was not casual. She had felt Elias go still beside her, not the ordinary stillness, something older. He had stepped slightly in front of her, not dramatically, just enough. The 3 men at the end of the path had looked at him for a long moment. Then they had turned and walked the other direction. Not hurried, deliberate, the way people change direction when they had received information that changed the calculus of what they were considering. Emma had watched them go. When she looked at Elias, he was already looking at her. She had not asked. The moment had a quality that asking would have disrupted, and she had learned that some information arrived in its own time, and that patience was not the same as passivity. They had kept walking. He had resumed the story about Vienna, exactly where he'd left off, as if the interval had not occurred, and she had listened, and the moon had been over the lake, and the ice had made small sounds in the dark water, and Emma had felt, for the first time in a very long time, that the specific configuration of her life had not been a series of accidents, but a series of arrivals, each one necessary for the next. She did not yet know what to do with that, but she was not afraid of it. That felt like the most important thing. The call came on a Thursday. Emma was between machines at the laundromat, checking the drum temperature on the heavy cycle units, when her phone buzzed with Catherine's number. She had learned by now that Catherine's number was not just the professional line. It was the number Elias used when something required more care than a text, when what he had to say needed the buffer of arrangement rather than the directness of his voice. She answered. "Miss Reyes," Catherine said. "Mr. Vane asked me to let you know that there may be some attention directed your way this week. He wanted you to be aware before it happened, rather than after." Emma stood between the machines. "What kind of attention?" she said. "There's a columnist," Catherine said, "who covers Chicago's more private business families. He's become aware that Mr. Vane has been seen publicly with someone. We expect he'll publish something by Friday." Emma absorbed this. "How did he become aware?" she asked. "The hospital," Catherine said. "Several staff members. It moves faster than Mr. Vane usually allows things to move." Emma thought about the intake nurse who had stayed near the desk, the attending physician's careful attention, the way the waiting room had quietly observed them. She should have expected this, she thought. She had just not thought ahead that far. She had been living inside the week she was in. "What does Elias want me to do?" she said. "Nothing," Catherine said. "He wanted you to know. That's all. He said the decision about how to respond, if you choose to respond, is entirely yours. He said to tell you he was sorry for the intrusion." Emma was quiet for a moment. "He said sorry," she repeated. His word, Catherine confirmed, with a hint of something in her professional warmth that might have been acknowledgement. Emma thanked her and hung up. She finished checking the machines. She worked the rest of her shift. She went home and made rice and beans, and sat at the kitchen table with the laptop open. And she did not open the document she'd been adding to almost every day now. 67 pages, and counting. She sat and thought. She called him at 8. His number this time, the one he'd given her that was not Catherine. That was direct. He answered on the first ring. "You knew this might happen," she said. "I knew it was possible, yes," he said, "when I stopped being careful about being seen. And you stopped being careful because of me." "Yes." She looked at the window. The alley was dark, a single light from the building opposite casting a small orange circle in the snow. "Are you sorry you did?" she asked. "No," he said. She heard the certainty of it, unqualified and immediate. "The article," she said. "What will it say?" "Probably that I've been seen with someone," he said. "Possibly that you work at a laundromat and a diner. Possibly your name." She sat with this. "This is new for you," she said, "being written about. I've managed a long time by being irrelevant to public interest," he said. "I was careful. For a long time I was very careful." And then Wednesday, in a waiting room. Yes, she almost said it was her fault, the old reflex rising in her throat, Derek's 3 years of "that's what happens when you don't think ahead." She caught it. "It's no one's fault," she said instead. "Things become visible. That's just what happens." He was quiet for a moment. "Are you angry?" he said. "No," she said, surprised, "but not angry." "What do you need?" he said. She thought about it honestly. "To not pretend it's nothing," she said. "To have it be a real thing we talk about rather than a thing you manage around me." He was quiet again. This quiet felt different from the others. Softer somehow, less composed, like something had been set down. "I've been managing things around people for a long time," he said. It became automatic. Protective distance as default setting. "I know," she said, "but I'm not most people. I told you. I notice things." "I know," he said. "It's one of the things." He stopped. "One of the things what?" she said. "One of the things about you," he said, "that I didn't expect." She looked at the orange circle of light in the alley snow. "The article comes out Friday," she said. "Likely," he said. Then we should talk before Friday, she said. Yes, he said. Come here, she said. To my apartment. Not a restaurant, not a car, not somewhere neutral. Here, I'll make dinner. Real dinner, not 2 jobs exhausted dinner. I'll cook. A pause. You don't have to, he said. She smiled at the window. I know, she said. You say that to me a lot. He said nothing. She smiled a little more. Thursday at 7, she said. I'll be there, he said. She hung up. She opened the document, added 4 pages, went to bed. He arrived Thursday at 7 exactly, which was the only way she could have imagined him arriving. He brought wine, which surprised her, not because it was unexpected exactly, but because it was domestic in a way none of their interactions had been, carrying a bottle up her stairs in his coat. The deliberate choice of someone who had thought about what to bring to a person's home. He stood in her small Pilsen apartment, and she watched him take it in. The kitchen with its window over the alley, the shelves of books that had been accumulating since college, the writing desk she'd found on the street 2 years ago and refinished herself, the 47 plants on the windowsills and in the corners, because she had discovered after Derek that being responsible for living things was good for her in a specific daily way. He looked at the plants. He looked at the books. He looked at the writing desk. He did not say anything, but she had the strong sense he was filing all of it away with the same sidelong, careful observation she had been bringing to him since the waiting room, that they were doing the same thing to each other, building a picture from accumulated particulars. She cooked. He sat at her kitchen table, and they talked the way they had been talking, following threads wherever they led, and she moved between the stove and the counter and the table, and the room felt smaller than it usually did, but not in a way that was uncomfortable. Over dinner, she said, "Tell me what your life looks like. The actual daily shape of it, not the history." He told her. Morning's reading. Meetings that were less about business than about maintenance, the careful ongoing work of existing in a human-facing world. Evenings that were long and mostly quiet, the walks she now knew about, the city at night, which he had described to her across 3 conversations as a place he understood better than the daytime version. It sounds lonely, she said. It is, he said, without apology. But you could fix it, she said. He looked at her. You don't have to be isolated, she said. You choose to be, because it's safe. I understand safe. I lived safe for 10 months, and it was necessary, and then it started to become a smaller life than I was capable of. He was looking at her with the layered gray eyes, and a face that had stopped performing composure somewhere between the soup and the main course, the tiredness visible and something behind it that she was learning to read. What are you saying? He said. She set down her fork. I'm saying that the article comes out tomorrow and Chicago is going to know your name attached to mine, and I think we should decide together what that means rather than let it be decided by a columnist. He was very still. What do you want it to mean? He said. She looked at him across her plastic table with the plants on the windowsill and the writing desk in the corner, and the city outside making its ordinary Friday night sounds. I want to keep going, she said. Whatever this is, however it unfolds, I want to keep moving toward it, instead of being careful. He looked at her for a long moment. You know what I am, he said. Yes, you know what that means for the shape of a life. I've thought about it, she said. I could lose you in 50 years, he said, quietly, to time. It would be inevitable. Emma looked at him. Or, she said, I could lose the next 50 years being afraid of that. The thing that happened in his face then was not the almost smile. It was complete, present and unguarded, and something that had been waiting behind all that composure, all that careful tiredness, finally arriving at the surface. She reached across the table. He took her hand. Outside, Chicago was exactly itself, loud and cold and indifferent and completely alive, the city that had been her anchor through the worst year of her life and was now, In the yellow light of her small kitchen with the plants on the sill and the writing desk in the corner, the place where something had begun, she held his hand. He held hers. The article came out the next morning. It was 6 paragraphs. It said a reclusive Chicago businessman had been seen publicly for the first time in years with a woman named Emma Reyes. It described her jobs. It used the word unlikely twice in a way that was not meant as a compliment. Emma read it over coffee. She sent it to Rosa, who sent back 3 words: ignore it, completely. She sent it to Elias, who responded, "Are you all right?" She typed back, "More than all right." Then she opened her laptop and wrote 8 pages. Spring came to Chicago the way it always did, without warning and with excessive commitment. 1 week of ice, and then suddenly the lakefront trees in pale green, and the temperature 40 degrees warmer, and everyone on the street, with the particular relieved bewilderment of people who had survived another winter and weren't quite sure they deserved to feel this good about it. Emma noticed it from the laundromat window on a Tuesday in April, the light doing something different than it had any right to do at 7 in the morning, slanting gold through the storefront glass and making the machines look briefly like something worth painting. She stood at the window for a long moment before the first customer came in. She had 79 pages now. She had been adding to it consistently since February, not every day but most days, finding the time in the margins of her shifts, at the kitchen table before bed, occasionally on her phone in the back of a car when Elias sent one. The novel had its structure now. She could feel the whole of it, the way you could eventually feel the whole of a city once you'd walked enough of its neighborhoods. The shape of it was legible even where the details were still unfinished. She had shown him 14 pages. Not the beginning. Pages 31 through 44. A section in the middle that she thought was the strongest, that she had revised 4 times and finally trusted enough to share. She had given him the printed pages at her apartment on a Tuesday evening and then gone to the kitchen to do dishes because she could not watch him read. He had read in silence for 20 minutes. Then, he had come to stand in the kitchen doorway. "Emma," he said. She turned from the sink. "This is what I thought it would be," he said. She looked at him. "When you told me about it," he said. "The shape of it. I had an idea of what it was. This is that. It's exactly this." She dried her hands on the dish towel. Her chest was doing something complicated. "Is it good?" she said. He looked at her with an expression she had learned by now, the one that said she already knew the answer, and he was going to let her have the dignity of it. "Yes," he said. "It is." She had cried, briefly, in the way that happened when something you'd been holding at arm's length for a long time finally came close enough to touch. He had not made anything of it, had not moved toward it or performed sympathy. He had just been present in the kitchen doorway while she collected herself. That had been exactly right. She thought about that now, at the laundromat window, watching Chicago discover spring. She thought about exactness, about the way certain things fit the shape of what you needed them to be, and certain things only appeared to. Derek had appeared to. For long enough that she had built 3 years around the appearance. She had been very young in the ways that mattered, not in age but in the specific experience of having her own perceptions systematically undermined. She was not that person anymore. She had rebuilt herself along different lines. The first customer came in with 2 overstuffed bags and a grateful expression, and Emma went back to work. At noon she got a text from Elias. "I need to tell you something tonight. Can you come to the apartment?" She had not been to the apartment on Lakeshore Drive. They had kept to her territory, her neighborhood, her restaurants, her kitchen table. She had understood this as his way of making space that was hers, not requiring her to enter his world before she was ready. She had also understood that she would be ready eventually, and that this text might be the eventually. She texted back. Yes. 7. The building was on the north end of Lake Shore, at an address that turned out to be a tower with a specific quality of restraint, that meant everything inside was serious without advertising itself. The doorman knew her name. She had not told anyone she was coming except Elias. She filed this away. The elevator opened directly into the apartment. It was not what she had expected, which was itself an interesting data point about her expectations. She had imagined something that matched the precision of his coat, the careful stillness of his manner, something immaculate and deliberately composed. The apartment was full of books, not arranged decoratively. Actually read books, in piles and on shelves that went floor to ceiling on 3 walls of the main room. A system that might have been organized once and had accumulated decades of additional material in the spaces between. There were also maps, some framed and some laid flat on a long table near the windows. A chess set, mid-game, on a small table that had clearly been pushed to the side at some point and never returned to. The windows faced the lake, and the lake in April evening light was doing what it did best, moving in shades of slate and pewter, and at the horizon, something approaching gold. He was standing at the windows when she came in. She took in the room before she took in him, and he let her, standing with his hands in his pockets while she looked at the books and the maps and the chess game frozen in the middle of something. "You live here," she said. "Yes," he said. "I mean actually," she said. "This is actually your home, not a managed space, your actual home." "Yes," he said. She thought about what she had expected, and what this was. "There's a mid-game chess set," she said. "I've been playing myself since 1987, he said. "I move one side, then I have to wait until I've forgotten what I was planning before I move the other. How long does that usually take?" "About a month," he said. "Sometimes longer." She laughed. It surprised her, the laugh arriving without announcement, and she saw the complete smile on his face in response, the one that had been arriving more frequently in the past weeks, no longer just the shadow of one. "Come sit down," he said. They sat on the couch that faced the lake windows. She could see the water from here, the early spring evening light shifting on it. "What did you need to tell me?" she said. He was quiet for a moment with the considered quality she had learned to give space to. "Someone came to see me this week," he said. "From the council, the governing structure of the territories." She waited. "They've become aware of our relationship," he said. "That's not unusual. The council tracks these things, interactions between my family and humans who become." He paused. "Consistent." She absorbed the word consistent. "What did they want?" she said. "To know my intentions," he said. "Whether this was temporary, whether I was managing it, or whether I was allowing it to become something that required their attention." "What did you tell them?" she said. He turned to look at her directly. "I told them it was not temporary," he said, "and that it was not something I was managing, and that their attention was not required because I was handling my own affairs." She looked at him. "What did they say to that?" she said. "They said that if I intended to continue, you would need to know more than you know, about the structure of things, about what it means to be consistently connected to someone in my position." "Meaning," she said. "Meaning, you would have some understanding of what you were entering," he said, "and some choice about whether to enter it." Emma looked at the lake. The gold at the horizon had deepened. The water was doing the thing it did at this hour, going very still near the shore and moving visibly further out, 2 different things, separated by a line you couldn't quite locate. "You told them about us before you told me this conversation happened," she said. "Yes," he said. She sat. "With that." "Because you knew what they'd say," she said, "and you wanted to have an answer ready before you came to me." He was quiet. "Yes," she said. "That's it, isn't it? You knew this was coming, and you needed to know your own position before you could talk about it honestly." He looked at her. "You're very perceptive," he said. I know, she said. And I'm not angry about it, she said. I want to be clear about that. I understand the instinct to establish your ground before you speak. What I want to know is whether your answer to them was also your answer to me, whether it was true in both directions. He met her eyes. It was true, he said. She nodded. Then tell me what I need to know, she said, about the structure of things, whatever the council wanted me to know. Tell me yourself. He told her. It took most of the evening. She asked questions when she had them, and he answered without deflecting, and the lake outside the windows went from gold to gray to the flat dark of a spring night. And at some point, Catherine had left tea on the kitchen counter without Emma hearing anyone arrive or leave, and Emma had gotten up to bring it back and sat back down and kept listening. It was complicated. Of course it was complicated. 3 centuries of structure didn't simplify. But he explained it the way he had explained the essential thing in the coffee shop, in plain declarative sentences, giving her the actual architecture rather than a curated version of it. When he finished, she held her cup with both hands. Does it change anything for you? He asked. She thought about it honestly. It makes it more real, she said. Not in a frightening way. In the way that real things are more real than imagined ones. There's more weight to it. That's not the same as being worse. He was watching her. I told you I noticed things, she said. I've been noticing since February that there was more to this than what was visible. You've been careful with me, she said. That's not a criticism. But you have. You've given me things in stages because you were trying to protect me from being overwhelmed. He didn't deny it. I appreciate the care, she said. I want you to know that, and I want you to know that you don't need to anymore. He looked at her. I can hold the whole weight of it, she said. I'm not as fragile as my history might suggest. Whatever I was when Derek finished with me, I'm not that now. He set down his cup. I know, he said. I've known that for a while. The staging was not about your fragility. Then what? She said. He was quiet. Mine, he said. She looked at him. I was afraid, he said, in the way that someone said a thing they had located after long searching, finding the word and using it with precision, that if I gave you all of it at once, you would leave. And I had become. He stopped. She waited. I had become very invested in you not leaving, he said. The lake was dark and still outside the windows. The apartment was warm and full of 3 centuries of books. Emma set down her cup. Elias, she said. He looked at her. I'm not leaving, she said. The way his face received this was something she would carry for the rest of her life. Not the complete smile this time, not the shadow of one. Something quieter and more essential. The expression of someone who had been holding something tightly for a very long time and had just been told they could set it down. I know, she said. I know that's a lot to trust, coming from someone you've known for 2 months. But I need you to hear it. I'm not leaving. He reached out. She took his hand. Outside, Chicago was doing what it always did, enormous and indifferent and quietly magnificent, and inside the apartment on Lake Shore Drive, 2 people who had both spent a long time learning the hard way how to be careful were deciding, together and without hurrying, to be something else instead. Summer arrived, and with it the sense that things had weight they could carry. Emma moved nothing. She kept her apartment in Pilsen, the 3 flat with the working lock and the alley window, the 47 plants and the refinished writing desk, and the shelves accumulating books. She kept her laundromat shifts, though she had reduced the diner shifts to twice a week because she had done the math on what the novel required, and the math had said something had to give. She spent 4 nights a week at the Lake Shore apartment. This was not a negotiated arrangement. It had arrived the way the Tuesday and Friday dinners had arrived, organically and without announcement, and one day she had counted, and it was 4 nights, and it felt like the right number for this particular season of things. Enough presence to feel real, and enough space to remain herself. She was on page 114. The novel had found its shape completely now, the whole arc of it visible, and the language doing what she wanted it to do more days than not. She wrote at the refinished desk in Pilsen, and sometimes at the long table in the lakeshore apartment, surrounded by maps and the mid-game chess set, and the view of the lake in its summer variations, which were considerable and never exactly repeated. Elias read every new section she gave him. He read carefully and said specific things, not encouraging vagueness. Specific things about what the sentences were doing, what the images were carrying, where the pacing served the story, and where it worked against it. He had been reading for 3 centuries, and he read the way someone read who had spent that time paying genuine attention, and the feedback was the most useful she had received from anyone. She told him this. He had said, "You've just never shown it to someone who cared about the work for its own sake, and yours simultaneously." She had thought about that for days. Rosa had come to the lakeshore apartment 3 times by midsummer. She and Elias had arrived at a particular equilibrium, Rosa asking the direct questions that Emma's own politeness sometimes slowed, and Elias answering them with the same plain accuracy he brought to everything, and Rosa receiving the answers with the particular satisfaction of someone who had been worried and was finding the worry becoming unnecessary. "He's not performing," Rosa told Emma on the sidewalk after the second visit. "Some people put on the version they want you to see. He's just there." "I know," Emma said. "It's a little disorienting," Rosa said. "I know that too," Emma said. The council sent a representative in July, a woman named Vera, who arrived at the lakeshore apartment on a Thursday evening, and was already there when Emma came in, sitting on the couch facing the lake windows with the particular quality of someone who had been in many rooms and assessed them all. Elias introduced them. Vera looked at Emma, with eyes that were not unfriendly, but were measuring in a way Emma had learned to recognize as professional rather than personal. They talked for 2 hours. Vera asked questions about Emma's life with a thoroughness that was not interrogation but was certainly evaluation, and Emma answered directly because indirection with someone like Vera seemed likely to be counterproductive. At the end of the 2 hours, Vera had a cup of tea and looked at Emma across the coffee table and said, "You understand what you're a part of." "Yes," Emma said. "And you choose it." "I do," Emma said. Vera looked at Elias. "She'll need to know the full protocols," Vera said. "In the next 6 months." He nodded. Vera set down her cup and left the way she had arrived, efficiently and without ceremony. Emma looked at Elias after the door closed. "Was that an approval?" she said. "Something like it," he said. She nodded. "What are the full protocols?" she said. He told her. It took 3 evenings. It was, like everything else about his world, more structured and more ancient than it appeared from the outside. A system that had evolved across centuries to manage the intersection of 2 kinds of existence, the one that ended and the one that didn't. She listened. She took notes on her phone. She asked the questions that needed asking. One evening, midway through, she asked, "Is this what you wanted? When you were walking alone in Chicago for 9 years, is this the shape of what you wanted?" He had looked at her from across the long table covered in maps. "I didn't let myself want a specific shape," he said. "I only knew that what I had wasn't it." "And now," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. "Now I know what the shape is," he said. She held his gaze. "Good," she said. She finished the novel in September. 143 pages. A story about a woman finding her way back to herself after believing someone else's version of who she was. She printed it at the laundromat after hours and held the manuscript in both hands and stood in the fluorescent light of the machine room and felt something she could only describe as the particular relief of a kept promise. She had promised herself at 22 that she would write a novel. It had taken longer than she expected, and it was not exactly the novel she had imagined at 22 because she was not exactly the person she had been at 22, and the distance between those two things was the story she had actually lived. She brought the manuscript to Pilsen and set it on the writing desk. She sat in the kitchen and called Elias. "I finished it," she said. "I know," he said, without explanation. She smiled. "Can I come over?" she said. "I've been waiting," he said. She took the manuscript with her on the train. She held it on her lap the whole ride up, this object that had not existed 2 months ago except in fragments, now complete and substantial and real. He opened the door before she knocked. He looked at the manuscript in her hands. She held it out to him. He took it with both hands, carefully, and looked at the cover page, her name on it, and the title, and something moved across his face that she recognized because she felt it herself. "You did it," he said. "We did it," she said. "You read every section. You kept telling me it was worth finishing." He looked up from the cover page. "You wrote it," he said. She smiled. "I wrote it," she said. He set the manuscript on the table. He looked at her in the entryway of the apartment with the lake behind him through the windows and the summer dark outside, and the accumulated evidence of her life spread through this space in the way that two people's lives gradually occupied each other's spaces without deciding to. "Emma," he said. She waited. "You said in February that you weren't leaving," he said. "I remember," she said. "I want to tell you," he said. "That I understand now what you meant when you said it." She looked at him. "I thought I understood then," he said, "but I was still holding something, still carrying the old protection of not quite believing it." He stopped. "And now I believe it, not because I've decided to, because the evidence is sufficient." She crossed the entryway. She stood close enough that she had to look up at him, and he looked down at her, with the gray layered eyes, and the face that had been losing its structural tiredness all summer, the way ice lost itself slowly to water, gradually and then completely. "I'm not going anywhere," she said again. "I know," he said. "I know." She reached up and put her hand against his face, and he leaned into it, this man who was 300 years old and had been walking alone through a city for 9 years, and had felt something crack open in his chest on a midnight subway when an exhausted waitress fell into his lap and said please. She had been that exhausted waitress. She was not that person anymore, but she was still the person who said please and meant it, who noticed things, who paid attention, who had rebuilt herself along honest lines and trusted the judgment she had reclaimed, and had walked toward the complicated fractured border between what she knew and what she didn't, and had found it was crossable. She stood in the entryway with her hand against his face. He covered her hand with his. Outside, the lake was doing what it did in September, preparing for the long change, the surface cooling, the colors shifting toward the deeper end of the spectrum, blue and slate, and that particular shade of green that only appeared in the weeks before the season turned. She thought about the article that had called them unlikely. She thought about Derek's unchanged smile, and the emergency room waiting room, and the dog with the wrong-colored eyes, and the coffee shop in Wicker Park on a gray February Saturday, and the manuscript on the table behind her. She thought about what Rosa had said. When you love something, you go all the way in. She was all the way in. She knew it the way she knew the things she trusted, not because she had decided to know it, but because the evidence was sufficient. "I love you," she said. He was very still. The particular quality of his stillness changed, deepened, became something other than composure, something prior to composure, the essential state beneath the management of 3 centuries. "I love you," he said, and the word in his mouth sounded like something he had been keeping careful until the right place to set it down. Outside, Chicago went about its September business, vast and unsentimental and quietly, persistently alive. Inside, 2 people who had both believed for different reasons that they were not available for this stood in a doorway with their hands together and let the thing be real. She said yes on a Tuesday in October. Not because he asked in an elaborate way. He had not arranged anything, had not coordinated with Catherine or Rosa or Norma, had not set a scene. They were in her apartment in Pilsen, the Pilsen apartment she had kept all through the summer and would keep, she had decided. Because it was hers, and it had been hers through the worst year and the best year, and it deserved to stay hers. He had been reading at the kitchen table while she revised the manuscript's 3rd chapter. She had sent it to 3 agents in September, and one had asked for the full manuscript, and the other 2 had not responded, and she was in the process of not reading into either outcome too heavily. He had looked up from his book. "Emma," he said. She had looked up from the manuscript. He had said it simply, without performance, the question and the reason for it, and the shape of the life he was asking her to share. All of it in plain, honest language, in the kitchen of her apartment, with the alley window, and the 47 plants. She had said yes before he finished. Not because she hadn't heard the whole question, because she had already answered it, had been answering it in increments since February, and the formal version of the question was just the last step in something that had already been decided by the accumulated weight of all the preceding ones. He had looked at her across the kitchen table. She had looked back. Then, she had gone back to the manuscript because the agent wanted revisions, and the deadline was real, and he had gone back to his book, and they had sat in the kitchen of her small Pilsen apartment on a Tuesday in October, with the city outside, and the plants on the sill and the writing desk in the corner. And it was ordinary, and it was extraordinary, and it was, she understood then, exactly what she had been looking for, when she hadn't known she was looking. Rosa cried at the news. Emma had expected this. Norma said she had known since the night with the good face. Emma had expected this too. The council sent a formal acknowledgement that was 3 pages and included language about protocols and timelines that Emma read carefully and made notes about on her phone. Vera called and said simply, "Good." Emma had expected this least of all, and it pleased her most. She called her sister in Phoenix, whom she had been speaking to more since February, the slow repair of a relationship that Derek had made costly by making Emma costly, and her sister said, "I always knew you'd land somewhere impossible and be completely at home." Emma thought about that. She was completely at home. In the Pilsen apartment with the working lock, in the Lakeshore apartment with the books and the maps and the mid-game chess set. In Norma's restaurant on Blue Island Avenue and the coffee shop in Wicker Park and the lakefront path where the ice ended and the open water began. In the life she had rebuilt along honest lines. In the story she had found herself in, which was not the story she had planned, and was not the story Derek's 3 years had suggested was available to her, and was not any story she could have written at 22 when she had first promised herself she would write one. It was truer than any of those. She finished the manuscript revisions on a Thursday. She sent them to the agent on a Friday morning from the kitchen table in Pilsen, with a cup of coffee and the October light coming through the alley window in the precise way that October light came through that particular window, at an angle that hit the plants and made them briefly luminous. She sat with the sent email for a moment. Then, she opened a new document. She looked at the empty page. She thought about a woman on a subway who smelled like night rain and old libraries. About a waiting room at midnight and the particular quality of a voice that wrapped around you like silk and steel. About the way certain things that looked like accidents were actually arrivals, each one necessary for the next. She thought about what it meant to say please and mean it. To ask for exactly what you needed in the desperate, honest certainty that the asking itself was worth the risk. She began to write. Outside, Chicago was doing what it always did, enormous and indifferent and full of a million ordinary moments that were also, for the people inside them, completely extraordinary. The lake was going gray with October. The trees on Pilsen's streets were turning, red and gold, and the particular orange that only existed for 2 weeks before it was gone. Emma wrote. She wrote because she had chosen to go all the way in, and the page was one of the places she went. She wrote because the story was not the point. The point was the arriving. And she was here, and the life she had built was hers, and the man she loved was 3 blocks away reading something in her language that had been written before her grandmother was born. And her sister was in Phoenix, and Rosa was at the library, and Norma was making pozole on Blue Island Avenue, and the agent had her manuscript. She wrote because she was a person who noticed things, and things were worth noticing. She wrote. The cursor moved across the empty page. The October light moved across the plants on the sill. Outside, the city went on.